Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. I hope you had a wonderful lunch, and I hope you're enjoying this third day of iCAAD. My name's Matt Thomas. I'm one of the founders of iCAAD, and I'm one of the fools that's tried to put this thing together over the last year or so. And I'm going to say something that I probably shouldn't now. This is my favourite presentation, and I'm really, really pleased to be introducing this one. It's got a personal meaning to me as well, because Sam Parker is an old friend and co-founder of the charity Music Support that I was a founder of as well a few years ago. And I met Dr. Cox in Cape Cod in September, and we immediately hit it off. And the first thing I thought is that we need to get this gentleman over to iCAAD, and we need to put Lou with Sam, because some magic's going to happen. So I won't say anything else other than that, and I will let them introduce themselves. But it really is a pleasure and a privilege to be introducing them. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the talk.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm just thinking, for you guys over there, there's not going to be much going on at that lectern or on anything to see. We don't have any slides or anything, so you might want to stay there, but you might want to come over here. Totally up to you. I shall leave it up to you. So thank you, Matt. My name's Sam Parker, and I'm an interfaith minister. And I don't know why I'm doing that. That's to prove it, I suppose. I'm just proving that I'm who I say I am. And this is Dr. Lou Cox. And we don't have really any housekeeping to do, I guess. So I guess we can move straight along to a proper, sort of fuller introduction. Dr. Lou, why don't you go first?
Okay. Everybody can hear me okay? Yeah. Good. So I'm going to assume you read some of the details about my history as a professional, so I'm not going to go into a lot of that with you. I am a psychologist, that's my basic training, but I think of myself as also kind of an awareness coach too. But I thought one way to kind of let you know a bit about me and how I work is to describe to you what I say to a new client, whether that's an individual or a couple or a group or a team. I've done a lot of work with teams too. And I tell them that my basic assumption about you, the client, is that you're fundamentally okay. If I turn this way, can you hear me? Because it sounds like you get more pickup this way. Okay, good. That you're basically fundamentally okay, that you were born with all the capacities that are human capacities. You have an intellect, you have creativity, you have empathy, you have compassion, you have all your emotions and feelings, which are sources of information for you. You have the capacity for insight, for intuition, for empathy. And that if you had access to all of those capacities, totally, so that every feeling you had, every emotion you had, every way of thinking that you might encounter, every creative move you made, every intuition you had was okay with you, you probably wouldn't be in this room, right? That you would have figured out along the way what you needed to do, what you needed to learn, what you needed to change, et cetera, et cetera. So my assumption from the get-go is that there's something interfering or blocking your access to one or more of those capacities. And my job is to help you begin to discover what those blocks are and what those interferences are. Because clearly, if you saw them, you would also be doing something about them. So they're operating in some kind of off-the-radar way where you don't actually see it happening, right? So that kind of gives you a sense of where I start. And I have always been interested in that question of what gets in the way. You know, there are techniques that are designed to kind of push you past, right? And those can be useful. But they, in my experience, they tend to catch up with you. You know, you may have a breakthrough, but then the forces that you've broken through but haven't necessarily actually removed, they're still inside us. They catch you and they bring you back, right? And that experience of breakthrough and closing up again, some people, you know, have really major breakthroughs in freedom, sense of being free, being who they are. But then the closing comes, and then they feel, oh my God, I failed. What's wrong with me? I must be doing something wrong. If it's a meditator, I got to meditate harder, or, you know, it's whatever it may be, or I got to exercise more, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a rough ride, and you know, change is a tricky, deep change, meaningful change is a really challenging process. And I think there's not enough appreciation for the forces that hold us in place, so that we keep thinking, you know, we should be able to do it better, we should be able to do it quicker, we should be able to do it more in a straight line, right? And then we feel like we're failing, and we can go into despair and all the rest of that. So I got very interested in trying to really describe those internal forces that hold us in place in a more clear way, so people could see them and understand that they're not their fault. Those things are put in there by conditioning, early conditioning. And then be able to, once see them, step away from them, and then where to step into for true, trustworthy inner guidance, right? So that's the basic message I give people as I start to work with them. And if it's a couple or a team, they're having problem in their communication. And again, if everybody in the team or everybody, sure, go ahead. Yeah, if the couple were also fully accepting of who they are, and had access to every part of themselves, they'd be having a magical relationship, right? So, okay, good. So I'll leave it there, and let's you introduce yourself.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. My name's Sam Parker. I'm a few things actually at 47. I find myself being an interfaith minister, which is weird. I was ordained in 2017. What's that, you might ask? I guess it came out of a journey, a recovery journey that started when I was 27, and I rang the National Drugs Helpline because my best friend was in active addiction and I didn't know what I was going to do. I thought if I stopped doing everything and gave up, she'd die. So I was and I realised that I couldn't actually stop her. So I was in a bit of a fix, really. And quite coincidentally, well, or not, I found myself in a family recovery group for friends and families of addicts. And that's when I first came into contact with the word God, which, to be honest, at the time filled me with, the normal reactions that a 27-year-old woman that's brought up in the suburbs of London would think, what a load of bollocks, basically. I mean, every time it was read out, I'd find myself wincing and trying to find a way of tolerating this notion, probably for the first year or so. But I was so desperate I kept going back because there wasn't any other way that I found relief from this, what turned out to be compulsion of mine, which was thinking and obsessing about somebody else. And it was funny actually when somebody pulled me aside and said, Sam, you do realise that codependency is an addiction. You're like an addict. I was like, what? But, when I examined my own behaviour, it was obvious that was the case. So so that's when I first came into the the idea of a higher power, and then as time went on, I did indeed come to believe that was real, by my own experience, although resisted, but also by hearing people turn up every week, and clearly there was something that was going on with them that was changing. So running concurrently with that, I worked in the music industry, and there was a lot of I was using drugs recreationally, and it's funny as Dr. Lou and I have been having our conversations, it occurs to me that a lot of my sorry mum, ecstasy taken in the 90s was definitely around trying to get in touch with some kind of, unity consciousness, as I kind of like to call it. That kind of idea of coming out of the isolated self and being in communion with other people, having a communal experience. The ego, as we will go on to talk about, had dropped. And there we were, without any kind of defences, sitting in a club, music pumping, and suddenly this was all there was in the moment, So I kind of, went along that whole kind of common journey that everybody did in the music industry in the 90s. But when I reflect back about my reasons for doing that, it was always trying to catch hold of something that I had the experience of, albeit fleetingly. So as Matt said, my music journey and my recovery journey kind of actually didn't go like that at all. It just went very like that until I came across Matt, and he was telling me about his idea about music support, which was to have a helpline for people who were in the music industry that were suffering from drug and alcohol or mental health issues. And knowing what I knew about recovery and knowing how important community was, it seemed like to create a community for a loving, held, non-judgmental space for people to come, where they will be heard in their fullness of their darkness and light, would be a really good thing to do. So that's how I met Matt. I now I practice being an interfaith minister really by ceremony, yes, but also the most important thing is how I am with people in every interaction. So I try to meet them with my guard down and my heart open, and to see the God in them, the whole namaste thing, I suppose. But I'm really, really fascinated about religion and about the origins of it, and about how fucked up it's got with the message, and how now we really need to go back to basics, really, and figure out where we can pick the gold, the diamonds, and how we can make that relevant for people now.
Right.
So that's
Beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah. So,
Just,
welcome everybody. Oh,
Yes. Welcome everybody. Yes, I was just going to say that Reverend Sam and I are new acquaintances, really. We were introduced maybe a couple of months ago. But as you said, and Matt knows, we really hit it off. And one of the ways we're going to try to do this is to try to stay in the moment with each other and be real about where we may be, right? So this has passed a little bit for me, but earlier on we were talking about how we're both terrified and excited to do this, right? So that willingness to be and talk about the scary side, the vulnerable side, the side of us that has all the doubt about, are we okay, or are we going to do a good job, or whatever, is really comforting and really opening and really freeing. So I'm so glad that you are a person who can do that. Helps me out.
we'll do it together, eh?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, so you wanted to, the next section.
Right, do a little kind of an awareness
Yeah.
exercise, we might call it. So if you're willing, just sit comfortably, and probably good to have your feet on the floor. And if it's okay to close your eyes, close your eyes. And just take a couple of nice breaths. See if you can get some breath down into your belly. Take a couple more. And in this moment, just kind of be with your body. You might want to do a kind of scan, maybe starting down in your feet and moving up through your legs and your trunk. But just kind of scan gently, slowly through your body, and just notice whatever your body is experiencing, whatever sensations may be going on in your body. And just see if you can allow them to be just the way they are. And then put a little focus on the trunk of your body, your chest and your belly. And notice what sort of sensations are going on within the trunk of your body. If you're having feelings of one sort or another, that's the area of your body where they'll be occurring. So again, whatever you may be feeling, just allow that to be so. Take another deep breath. And I'm going to ask you to do something while your eyes are still closed, and I just want you to pay attention to what happens in the trunk of your body when I make this suggestion. And that is just to be aware that you're not alone, that you have somebody sitting probably on the either side of you, that the room is full of people. And see what experience that brings up for you. Is it comfort? Is it excitement? Is it nervousness? Is it numbness? Is there some fear? So whatever's there, just again notice it, allow it to be. And then come back into the center of your own body, into your trunk. Take a couple more breaths. And just see if you can be with yourself, not only noticing your own experience, but bringing a little, what we might call friendly curiosity to it, and some kindness. And then another deep breath, and you can open your eyes. Okay, good. Probably we're all a little bit more here. One of the things that I'm always aware of is there's more going on within us than we're aware of in any given moment. And taking a pause like that and looking within, it's sometimes quite amazing what you get in touch with. So, yeah. Next.
So we're going to start off with what we've got in common. And one of the things Dr. Lou and I have got in common, strangely, is working with rock bands. And obviously, ego and rock bands are happy bedfellows. And I've come across my fair share of egos. One of the most normal ones I'm married to, actually, in terms of creative egos. But I've also been involved with some, borderline, narcissistic egos. And in a way, they're kind of necessary. And we'll go on to talk about egos in general. In fact, why don't we start with ego? So let's have a definition. What do we mean when we talk about ego?
Okay. So this is going to be a little conceptual to begin with, but I wrote a book called Ego, the Ghost in Your Machinery. And the book is in two parts. The first part is a pretty full-on description of what an ego really is and how it works. And the second part is, if you're not going to be ruled by your ego, where do you go to find your true guidance inside? I call that the truth place, right? But my experience is that word ego is used a lot in recovery and spiritual practice and self-development stuff, and usually in a kind of negative way. The ego is a problem of one sort or another, but that people don't really know what it is. Is it a something, like a real something that is inside me somehow, that is operating and affecting me and making me do certain things and think certain ways and feel certain ways? Is my ego different from my me? Is my me really different from what we're calling an ego? And most people's conception of an ego is kind of a simple, like he's got a big ego or a little ego or something like that, right? Actually, the ego is a much more creative entity and tricky shapeshifter kind of creature. I actually think of it as kind of like an entity inside us. And when I start talking this way to clients, they often, get like I'm telling them they're schizophrenic or multiple personalities or something, right? Because, basically our experience is there's nobody else in here. There's just me. So if I'm thinking, I am thinking. I'm not being thought. The thought is not happening to me. I am somehow thinking. So the whole notion that there may be something, a kind of system of responses and ways of thinking and ways of feeling and ways of believing that may be different from who we are and has a mind of its own and actually operates actively within us, often off the radar. That's why I called it the ghost in your machinery. It just is a tricky thing to get in the beginning, right? But in my experience, again, going back to like looking at the forces that interfere and block my access to all of the capacities of my native self, and doing a lot of personal work, because I was very blocked. I mean, not to play on the word a ghost a whole lot, but I felt like in my 20s I was kind of a ghost of a person, that I looked good, I was blessed with good looks. I had a pretty good brain. I had an athletic body. I was a nice guy. So I passed, but I just felt like, wow, something essential is wrong, and I felt again like there's something wrong with me, right? Not that something had happened to me that might have put me in this place inside myself. So a lot of personal interest in exploring this realm of these interferences and blocks, right? Some of it came out of the work with the bands too, because in the rock and roll world, having an ego is a good thing. You know, you're supposed to have an outrageous ego, right? And you know, do outrageous things and all the rest of that. But in terms of then how it works against the person, that became, again, because obviously there was addiction going on, there was breakdown in communication and all sorts of bad stuff happening, right? So I need to sort of go back to the beginning in a certain sense. We each have, every human being has two absolutely fundamental needs. One is for the embrace of what I call our tribe, right? And the first tribe, of course, is our family or our caretakers, right? And that's a need. It's not up for choosing, you know. We treat that need kind of like it's optional, like you shouldn't really need people. It shouldn't matter to you what people say about you or reject you or disrespect you. Sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Total bullshit. Total bullshit. But it's a cultural belief, so that we actually end up feeling rather ashamed of that need, and we hide it for the most part. But it is fundamental, absolutely fundamental, and it is also fundamental to the survival of a young child. And that's how a child responds to rejection or neglect, or that it's terrifying and hurtful and humiliating, inherently humiliating. So that's the origin, I think, of some of the shame we carry. The other need is the need to be true to who I am, true to my essential individual self, right? And how that may be different from others, but true to what my own experience is, what my thinking is, what I have come to see and learn, right? And if I'm not true to that, that also is painful and hurtful and angering, right? It's a violation of my integrity, of my wholeness. And pain is the result of having to turn against that, right? So those two needs don't have to be in competition necessarily. If you were raised in the ideal family where you were totally accepted for who you are and every feeling you had and maybe how you think differently or blah, 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 you could be yourself, right? And no problem, right? But the human race is not there, right? So every family, every social group, every culture has their goods and bads, right? That it's, you're okay if you're this way, you're not okay if you're that way, right? And that starts very early in childhood. So in one family it might be, you know, you're not allowed to get angry, right? So every time you get angry, you get a beating or you get shamed or some kind of consequence happens, right? Or you're not allowed to move your body too much, you know, you get all too excited. My mother used to say, we're gonna take you off the merry-go-round. You know, that was her way of saying we're too excited and we gotta calm down, right? But said in a tone of voice that was like so depressing and oppressing, right? Some families will prize an intellectual life, right? So, you know, be intellectual, don't be emotional. So these splits go on. Gender, you know, gender descriptions are another good example on the cultural level of the goods and the bads. Men can be this way, they can't be that way. Women are supposed to be this way, they're not supposed to be that way. So we get divided in ourselves, and we take it in because we cannot help it as kids. And we really turn on ourselves because we need to keep the connection with our parents. That's primary. So if I have to, like I use the analogy of the wolf chewing its leg off to get out of the trap, right? It survives minus the leg, right? So if I have to chew my anger off or chew my fear off or put that into my unconscious in some way, I will do that. And we all do that. So we're starting from somehow fundamentally I'm not okay as I am. I have to be some way to be okay and not be some way to be okay. And that becomes a endless effort at, trying to be the way that you've been, where it's safe to be and acceptable to be. And that's the fundamental job of the ego. The ego promotes and tries to show what is good and acceptable about you, and hide and repress what you've learned is not acceptable about you. And it's active in doing that. So it's also compulsive or compulsory. So you have to be the way that's good to be. That's not a choice. It might be a good way to be, it might be an effective way to be, but you have to be that way. So it gets rigid and automatic. So it's all on automatic. This is not even choice anymore. After a while, we think we're living a choiceful life. I mean, the more I live and the more I work with people, the more I see, like, wow, we're on automatic most of the time. We're not consciously choosing. And, that can be useful, but also it can be a big problem. And if you go against the rules of the ego, you're going to get punished. You get rewarded if you are, in compliance, right? So you can be rewarded with a sense of superiority or goodness or rightness and belonging and safety and a lot of good stuff. I mean, really, all that stuff is, we need to feel those feelings. So they're very powerful attractors, right? If you go against it, either you're failing for whatever reason. Let's say you're supposed to be the smartest kid in the class and now you get a B. Your ego will punish you for that. And it's because you've absorbed the shame, really, that is sort of embodied in thousands of different communications from parents and teachers and peer groups, etc.
Can I ask a question?
Let me just finish that thought, though.
Okay.
Thank you. So it will hit you with shame and fear and doubt. That's the way it gets you back in line. It thinks it's trying to make you safe again and acceptable again, right? A lot of you have had awakenings around your egos and discovered, oh, this ego is actually creating some problems for me. I don't want to obey its rules. That's a real challenge because the ego will be shaming you and terrorizing you and making you doubt your own experience, right? So we'll talk about that some more, but I just wanted to complete the loop there. Yeah.
So the ego's function when, this is my understanding from what you've just said, so the ego's function when we're children, for me, is to make sure that my mum and dad take care of me.
Yeah.
And I'm accepted.
Right. And valued.
And valued.
Right.
So any behaviour, as you say, making mischief, talking too loudly, being angry,
right.
Being sad,
right.
Any kind of expression, physical or emotional,
right.
if that's not fully greeted with open arms by the caregiver,
right.
and it's repeated, that message is repeated,
right.
that it's not okay.
Right.
As you say with the wolf, you start chewing off whatever that bit is.
Right. Yeah, and it's kind of a mystery, there's this word repression, right? It's still kind of a mystery how that happens, but it does happen. There's just too much evidence. Once you wake up, what do you wake up? You wake up to something that was there all along and you didn't realize it was there, right? So repression does exist. It's not just simple ignorance, this stuff is held down, right? It usually takes some force to break through. So yes, I don't know how, I actually remember one story of a client of mine who, she had blown up at her son, and she was not wanting to be that way, right? But she lost it, and she got into a rage at her son, and her son went up into his bedroom, and she felt really bad afterwards, and she went up to see what was going on, and she heard through the door him saying, "You're a bad boy, Mark. You're a bad boy. You're a bad boy. You're a bad boy." And I think actually that's one way we do it, and we forget that we actually talk to ourselves. And then, that gets in there on automatic, and now it's not, I don't have to effort to talk to myself. It just goes off, right? But that inner conversation gets triggered in kids to help. They want to stop because it's scary and it hurts. It feels terrible to even just be ignored by a parent, right? But let alone be attacked and accused, right? So that need, for acceptance and value, there's a pain associated with not getting it that can be, as many of you must know, really devastating. And it's no wonder we have to put it away, right? It's too much to bear as a child. And then we're into ego operation. We're into, some kind of survival strategies to get through and get by. And, some egos are very effective. If you're raised in a family where competition and ambition and, success, etc., is the good thing, that's the way you got to be, but you got to be that way, right? You very well may be that way and be very successful. However, your intimate relationships may suffer on the other side of that coin, right? So there can be an upside and a downside to every ego. It works in certain ways, gets us certain things, has currency in the culture. But there's always a downside, right? And probably most of you have bumped into the downside and done some work on it.
So in terms of, so how does what's the, let's call them the rock star ego. So in your encounters with the bands that you've worked with, what's playing out there? What is the drive to be on stage, elevated above everybody else,
Right.
to having their voice amplified
Right.
to an audience?
Well, first off, and I would say this is native self, right? There is a love of music, and there is a love of creating, and there's a love of playing. It's like kids love to play, right? And in a certain sense, I think, especially performers, kind of keep some of that playful. That has not been squished in the family, right? So maybe that kid was the family mascot, that did the playing and relieved all the tension in the family or whatever. So that's like a natural delight, right? And then when they find each other and they click, that's like falling in love, So there's a kind of honeymoon thing that can go on in a
Is this with the band members?
With the band members,
Yeah.
right. However, they all have egos, but as I'm saying, there are different types of egos depending on the goods and the bads, right? So the singer out front guy is definitely going to have a star ego, right? It's good for him and necessary for him to be seen, to be the center of attention, and he got rewarded for that in his family, or he wouldn't be that way, right?
So that might be the little boy or girl who's sort of twirling in the middle of the room in front of the TV.
I'm not telling tales. Yes, right, exactly.
Okay.
Right, or doing something.
Everyone claps.
Right, or as the jokester or whatever it may
Okay.
be, right?
Or mum and dad stop arguing.
So that's one type of ego in a band. The bass guy, because he's usually like the bridge between rhythm and melody, is much more of a kind of caretaker ego, pacifier ego. He's the guy who's, when the family may have been tried to be the peacemaker, right, and the diplomat in the family. The drummer is usually the wild guy, right, with all the aggressive energy and, maybe the scapegoat of the family or something like that. There are other, roles in a band, but, so...
And the lead guitarist.
Yeah, that's a tricky one.
That is a tricky one,
Yeah.
because usually they want to be the star,
Right,
but they've never
right.
quite...
Right,
kind of
right.
teetering on the edge.
Right, so they might be the second
in command, yeah.
second born.
But bass players being codependents, yeah, I definitely
Right.
recognise that.
Right. So, the creativity comes through the ego, right? We were talking about creative egos, right?
Yeah.
And I always felt that was a little bit of a misnomer, right? That there are creative people. There are people who are definitely much more in touch with their creativity than others are, for whatever the reason may be. But that's still going to be shaped by their ego, right? So, you know, in rock and roll, also every member of the band also has a partially rebel ego, right? Because that's what that whole thing is about, is being a bad guy, right? Being rebel, right?
A disruptor.
Be a disruptor, right? Yeah. So, so the different bands are going, you know, maybe rock and roll is kind of, you know, one genre that whoever gets creative in that is going to create kind of music within the genre, and the lyrics are going to be kind of the same, right? But if you step out of rock and roll and go to folk music or whatever other kinds of, you know, different genres of music there are, that's very creative, and that person has an ego, but apparently a very different ego is there, wanting to say something different, wanting to express differently. But the ego puts a limit on the creativity too, right? So often, I'm not sure if this actually works, but the first album, you know, that's a success, maybe the second album you can kind of ride that, right? But the third album, you've run your load, so to speak, right? So you're going to have to do something different,
Yeah.
and your ego won't let you,
Right.
because there's you're like, if you're going to do something different, you're going to have to be spontaneous. You're going to have to take chances. You're going to have to blow the lid off, you know, the way you've done it so far. You may have to try out, you know, why don't you do this instead of that? And that's all scary and uncertain, and the ego does not like uncertainty. The ego wants to be in control, wants the same thing over and over and over again. So a lot of one-hit wonders, I think, are because they can't shift gears.
So are we saying that any kind of longevity in a musical artist's career
Right.
can correlate with the amount of work that they've done on themselves?
It can, yeah, it does.
Because to do album number 2 or 3, I mean, you could roll this out to any kind of creative
Right.
pursuit.
Second novel, whatever.
Second novel, exactly. The next theatre production, or you know, etc. It requires risk.
Yes.
Because up until the point of producing the first work, that's always been about the ego and the and the being in tune with the creativity.
Right.
You know, from there or from there.
Right.
The ego and the creativity have managed to negotiate that position.
Right.
But in order to not keep churning out the same format, which is going to get boring
Right.
to people that you want people to enjoy and buy it and go with you on your journey,
Right.
you're going to have to step out of that.
Right.
And if you haven't done any work on your ego, are we perhaps saying that there's going to be a problem with that because there's too
Right.
much risk? And you're
Yes.
going to be like, no.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're in unknown territory.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So. Yeah, it's. I was just, as you were talking, I was thinking about Bob Dylan and how he switched from acoustic to electric
Yes.
and got a
Not favourably.
shitload of
Yeah.
criticism, right? Really, just yeah, like he betrayed the folk tradition, right? That's the kind of risk taking, you know. So he's evolved in his creativity. He may not always have done great songs, but
Bob Dylan converted to Christianity, didn't he?
there was a period there where he
I don't know
was
if he
singing
still
it.
is.
He was singing about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Some of his worst stuff, I think. If I may be so. Yes.
Can I ask a question? Because around this, it's interesting when we're talking about different artists, but someone like Joni Mitchell, who was very bare, you know, making songs and very exposed as a person,
Yes.
reflective on her, not just, well, if we're dealing with ego, but she went into something that she wanted to hide. She moved from that type of music to put a band around her at some point. What is in play there? What part of, because I'm trying to understand what you mean by ego, but there are sometimes the artists with the complexity of ego don't want to feel that the audience is seeing them.
Well,
Is it the real them or the ego?
yeah, well, obviously I can't speak for her insides, but one of the pressures that you're put under when you're successful, right, is, you know, your first album, you're, you know, fighting to get seen, right? So there's no pressure yet of I am now a success, right? So once you're a success, your tribe expands enormously. Your fans are now a part of your tribe. Your music cohorts are part of your tribe. So some of the pressure she may have felt, I'm totally conjecturing here, is she was afraid that if she took this music out, she might get some criticism or rejection from her tribe, whether that was her fans or her fellow musicians. Does that?
No, I think she felt, looking in, I think there's a point for some people where she felt that they were seeing inside her, and she wanted to have some distance between her, you know, the complexity of being an artist is,
right.
you know, who are you? You know, you're
Right.
there and you're there. You're split.
But that's maybe how she was able to step forward into doing something else. Maybe that wasn't an inside job. Maybe that had to be an external job.
Okay.
So to put the band around, to have more
hide.
people to hide,
Yeah.
exactly.
And
Come
also,
out again.
Because the threat
But
might
I
have been
just
too
wondered
great.
what
Yeah.
ego was in there.
well, yeah, it can get a little mushy in terms of making those distinctions, right?
Yeah.
And that may also be a healthy move, you know, because the artist, if they're really going to go down deep and
Yeah.
change and open up again, you need a protected environment for that. You need to not be getting criticism. One of the pieces of work I did with the bands were the way they talk to each other. You know, they're mostly guys, right? And macho, you know, was the name of the game. So somebody would bring in a new lick, like that they felt pretty hot about, right? And the band member, that sucks, right? You know, bam. It's like, you know, you're killing this guy's little precious baby that he's bringing in. But they couldn't relate to that vulnerability to begin with. That was just how we talked, right? But the artist, because, you know, if you're really doing creativity from your soul, you're vulnerable. You know, you're really exposing some very vulnerable aspects of yourself, maybe even aspects you haven't fully integrated yet, right? So you need a safe space to do that, right? So you might have to go offline for a while, or put a bunch of people around you, or find fellow travelers, as we all need to do. Does that make sense? Yeah.
It's almost as if the last place, the very last place a creative ego is going to feel safe is under the spotlight of fame. Which is ironic, isn't it? Because there's such a need for community, but yet as soon as you create your fan base,
Right.
and you go electric,
Right.
and it's shit,
Right.
then you've got the response to
Yeah.
deal with.
Yeah. I mean, when you're on stage and you're being received well.
Well, I just mean when you're looking at your Twitter feed these
Yeah, that
days, you
too.
know, your social
Yeah,
media, because
right.
you're not just encountering that when you're on stage
Right,
anymore,
right.
or out in the public. You know,
Right.
I just wonder for, you know, because I do a lot of work with artist managers,
Right.
and trying to help them understand what might be going on for their artists. You know, and I guess now that we have, you know, we're all subject to social media, aren't we? We can all see how liked or unliked we are just by with a little scroll, you know, and it's just another, I suppose, you know, turning the conversation away from the bands and perhaps thinking a bit more about us here in the room.
Mhm.
It might be kind of interesting to kind of think about the fact that actually I've got an Instagram account, I've got a Twitter account, you know, I expect everybody in the room has. You know, the compulsion just when you post something to then see whether or not someone liked it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, who are my tribe?
Mm-hmm.
Am I accepted?
Yeah, yeah.
Do they like me?
Right.
And even after, you know, I've been in therapy since I was 21, I'm 47, and I'm still fucking scrolling like a nutcat, you know, and it's compulsive. And we were talking about the compulsivity of the ego as well,
Right,
weren't we?
Right.
Yeah,
and
a bit like
well,
you know, the ego behaviour and addiction are actually quite similar.
so here's again where it may get a little mushy, right? Because there is a basic need that we have to be accepted, and we seek it, right? That's natural. That's not ego. We're born with that. We need the embrace. We need the embrace. We need the embrace. We just
The
need
loving
embrace.
gaze of the mother.
Yes, something like that, right?
Yeah.
When you're not all right with yourself, that becomes then compulsive, right? If I'm okay with myself, I don't have to seek it compulsively. I still need it. I still want it.
Yeah,
But I can put it down,
yeah,
and I can handle people giving me crap and not go into a total shame spiral. It'll probably trigger shame, but if I've done the work and understand where that shame comes from,
yeah.
I can step aside from it. But we are always going to be in need of each other. And I think that's a thing we have trouble just accepting and working with, right? Like I work with a lot of men, and there are sort of two categories of males as far as egos go, the traditional male ego. There's the guy who fits the traditional male ego, and he's a tough guy, basically. And there's the guy who doesn't fit the traditional male ego, and he's a softy, right? He feels himself as a failed male in that system, right? The guy with the successful traditional male ego probably won't show up in therapy, right? Until that ego gets him in some sort of trouble, right? Bangs up against it in some way. But the real deal is, and I say to guys, you know, if you're going to be a whole male, and this actually applies to females too, you need both your heart and your balls. And we kind of split that up, you know, like if you're going to be a ballsy guy, you can't have heart. If you're going to be a heartfelt guy, you can't have balls. And with women, you know, if you're going to be a powerful woman, you can't be comforting and, you know, embracing. If you're going to be embracing, then you can't be a powerful female.
Why do we split that? Why do we split those two?
Again, it starts in the family somewhere. I mean, where all of this originated, God knows, you know, maybe he doesn't know either. But I don't know. But it's, you know, you just look and there it is, right? I think sometimes getting into the why is confusing, right? It's sort of like what's so? This is so. We are all divided in ourselves, as far as I'm concerned. Everybody has an ego, and nobody was born with one. So your ego is not your fault, right? But everybody has one. I have a little logo I have on a t-shirt that says, do you have an ego, or does your ego have you? And that's really the matter, right? Because we all do have an ego. If you don't know you have an ego and what it is and how it works and, you know, how it's operating inside you, and you can't catch it in operation, then it's running you, right? It has you. But if you can begin to see it in operation and know it is not you, you get out of the blame game, you know, like most people are familiar with the inner critic, which is really a big part. That's the punishing side of the ego. When you realize, like, a lot of teaching goes on around this, the critic is an automatic voice that you have no control over. It just shows up, it goes off, you know, it's like an automatic thing. If you catch it and see it and know it, oh, that's the critic, now you've identified it as not me, that's the critic. You have a better chance of stepping away from it and into a safer space inside your own body, your own self.
What's just a thought occurred to me. What's the relationship between addiction and the ego?
Big question. Big relationship too. So this may be a little heretical, I'm not sure. There was the whole history in alcoholism and addiction where alcoholism and addiction were treated as a symptom, right, in the psychiatric community and the psychological community. And this is back, like in the 1950s and maybe 60s too, I don't know. And a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists would work with people who were actually addicted or alcoholic, treating them as if that was a symptom of some other problem, and they would be searching for the other problem, and like that was then going to cure them of their compulsive drinking. I really didn't understand that the addiction and the alcoholism had become a problem in itself, and a problem creator in itself, right? So there's a very strong reaction within the alcoholism community to move away from psychiatric treatment for a long period of time because they were really harming people. They weren't helping the alcoholic or the addict. And then through a whole sort of evolution, things turned around and the psychiatric profession finally became a diagnostic category in the DSM and was accepted as a disease, and that became a very, very important counter force. Now it's a disease, it's not a symptom, right? And the whole notion of maybe this starts in childhood, maybe the original wound for all our dysfunction is in childhood, got sort of pushed off the map for quite a period of time.
Because it's now bounced to that.
Now it's come back. But that distinction between, because alcoholism is a disease in itself, it is a problem in itself that needs to be addressed in a very particular, specific way. Same with addiction, same with any addiction, right? It has become almost like a demon inside, that has a mind of its own and a life of its own and a course of its own, et cetera, and there are certain ways that work with that demon that don't, and others that don't, right? But to answer your question, I think, again, if I have come through a family where I am, let's say not even fully embraced, but largely embraced for who I am, so my whole breadth of feeling and thinking and intuition, and also my inner reader of other people, because kids really read their parents, right? And they often react to that reading and then get punished for that. So that inner GPS, I called it, goes offline also, right? If all of that was in place and I take a drink and I get, high, wow, that's pretty interesting, and maybe I feel a little loosey-goosey, and, but I don't think I would be going after it to fix me, right? To get me away from my bad feeling about myself, right? That said, because I think we all enter our adolescence and adult life with quotes, a bad self buried somewhere in us, right, that we're trying to manage and hide. How come some people go the alcohol route or the drug route? That's multi-causal, right? But because you have an ego, and the ego says you're not supposed to be out of control, and you start to get out of control, your ego is going to beat you to hell and try to convince you you're not out of control. That's where the denial, right, comes in, fiercely, and to death.
You had a question there.
Well,
Sorry, I've had my back to you.
That's
Yeah.
right. I just realized we've only got half an hour and left.
Yes.
And I really came to hear both of you. And,
Yes.
and you know, I like
Thank you.
the notion of God. I
Yes.
just would love some, you know, I would love to hear from you. You know, I really get how what you're saying, I really get
Right.
it, and I would really I have such a longing to hear.
Wonderful, wonderful.
So I thought I would
I do too. My ego may have carried me away here a little
you
bit.
know, I was torn by going away or just make the request. So I just thought that I would speak up.
Terrific,
Oh,
terrific.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Lou. I mean, we're going to come on a little. Really, what we've done, I think, at the moment is establish what the problem is,
Right.
and we're going to go into what the solution is. And empathic connection is what we were going to be talking about. Lou was going to be talking about, but perhaps I'll just say a little bit about empathic connection and my take on that, really.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd just read something out, which I found, which is from Rumi, who I love. He's an Islamic mystic. In God's presence, there is no room for two egos. You say ego, and he says ego. Either you die in his presence, or he will in your presence, so that non-duality may remain. And I think that if we're talking about unity consciousness, or one love, or yoga, I think that has its meaning in unity. There'll probably be people who'll be able to tell me that better than anybody else.
That's true.
I suppose there's this idea, the way I like to think about it is this. I mean, I think, you know, we come from source, we travel back to source, and the journey is what we are in our bodies, and it almost feels to me a bit like, you know, it almost makes sense to me that if we were to choose what our journey was going to be, if we were to choose what we wanted to achieve at the end of it, if we were given the opportunity to say, this is what I need to learn to become more fully myself, then what would my human journey be? So I definitely think that in order to be aware of what we might call God or have unity consciousness, there is a need for either me to block out God, if you like, or and just be with myself, or for God to appear to me or to be in connection with me, in which case I've got to do something about my ego. You know, when you were talking about what do you call your authentic self?
The native self.
The native self. You know, for I think the joy for me in recovery has been about getting in contact with my native self, about who I really am. I think we were talking earlier about the idea that you know, in my food recovery, there's definitely been a sense that even though I may relapse with food, having worked through the steps has enabled me to be able to, for my ego to be able to accept the fact that a mistake has been made and not send me into the sort of shame bin, if you like. Definitely what my inner experience was when I used food to make myself feel better was that almost I'd be sent into a hermetically sealed room where there was no light, there was no connection, it was a very isolated experience. But the reason I ate in the first place was to try and give myself comfort, because I felt already in an isolated room with no connection with anybody. And really, the only, and as I say, I've tried taking ecstasy and acid and, you know, smoking weed and all the rest of it, and that kind of worked for a bit, but then kind of stops working. I tried to have a good bunch of friends and, you know, all the things that people do in their 20s. And then, you know, by the time I got to my 30s, it was just become very, very apparent that I absolutely had to do something about being in connection with God. And I say God, what I mean by that is that's just a shorthand, really. I don't really know what it means. It means different things to different people. But for me, I suppose what it means is feeling connected to something that isn't my ego. Because if I'm left to my own devices, I will every time I open my eyes in the morning, I will connect to my ego. And then my ego will tell me what it is that's happening during the course of the day, how I'm going to be feeling, whether I should, you know, is this day going to be okay? Isn't it going to be okay? And I cannot stand the fucking chatter. I have to do something about that first thing. And what I do is that I pray and I meditate and I write, and I have to realign myself with the fact that my ego isn't me. And what's frustrating, and we've talked about it before, is that I have to do it every day. It's so annoying. Why? You can't just have this revelation and then move ahead with the next, you know, at least couple of months or a week, right, without having to, you know, but the fact that it comes down on you, it's like I go to sleep and I'm like, oh, brilliant, and I get, that's all right, said my gratitude list, and then I wake up doing, and it's like, you know, fucking, what's it called, Groundhog Day, and there it is again on me, you know, and I have to go. And it's what is it? I think it keeps me humble. I think it reminds me, you know, that I have to. This is the deal with being a human being. You know, we've talked about that, haven't we? Mm-hmm. This is the deal. We have an ego. It's part of our makeup. It's part of being a human with a body on the earth. And what I really love about, and we were talking earlier as well, I heard yesterday, there's this guy called Father Richard Rohr. He's a Franciscan monk, and he lives in Albuquerque in America. And I absolutely love him. I came into contact with him initially because he'd written a book called Breathing Underwater, and it was
Breathing Underwater.
Breathing Underwater. Have you read it?
No.
No, yeah.
Sounds good.
Breathing Underwater, and it's about Franciscan theology in around looking at each one of the 12 steps and drawing the parallels, and it's absolutely fascinating. And he was saying yesterday when I was listening to a podcast of his that the notion of original sin by St. Augustine was that it doesn't appear anywhere in the Bible at all, even the Old Testament or the New Testament. It is absolutely 100% there because St. Augustine, 400 years later, wrote about it. And in a way, he wasn't trying to put a downer on everybody by saying we're inherently bad. What he was actually trying to say is that we have an ego. We have, part of being a human on the earth is that we have the propensity to do shitty things and think shitty thoughts and behave in ways that don't serve us or anybody else. But unfortunately, Roman Catholicism got hold of this and ran with it and decided that somehow it mutated into this sort of shit stick that we have to sort of beat ourselves up with. And the notion that we are inherently bad. And of course we're not inherently bad, we're inherently good. And what I love is that, when you look at the Old Testament, it's and God created blah blah and it was good. And God created blah blah and it was good and it was good. Not once does it say.
Right.
So this whole idea of us being inherently bad is rubbish. We are inherently good, like you say. It's our conditioning, are having to be brought up by imperfect parents, all the stuff that they bring, all the stuff that they're, you know, we're only 2 generations away from the Second World War. You know, we're all fucked, aren't we? How are we ever not going to be? How are we ever not going to be? You know, so I just, I think that's the thing that I wanted to communicate, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to do that.
So what keeps you meditating and praying and writing in the mornings?
What keeps me? If I don't, I'm in a whole heap of trouble. That's why. I've got no choice. It goes very badly wrong.
It's so interesting that makes you feel so good is so hard and such a challenge.
Yeah.
But drinking alcohol or whatever else you might use, binging, purging, which I think our bodies really don't like.
Yeah.
Right.
That's so pleasurable.
Yeah.
But I'll just
No,
add,
do.
I think it takes you out of the trouble, right?
Machinery.
But into a good space in yourself. You drop into a place that
What
you
does the
like.
meditation and prayer?
Yeah, when you do that,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, so it's not just keeping you out of trouble.
No, it's not just keeping me
It's
out of
also
trouble.
accessing a resource, whether it's spiritual or, you know, or
It's it's accessing a resource that I wouldn't normally have access to
when you're
unless
in the
I
shit
did
hole. Yeah, right, exactly.
that activity.
Right, right.
And does it not feed the empathic connection, the kindness towards yourself?
Of course.
So then,
Yeah.
you deeply feed this part of you that feels better and better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Empathic connection is how I have learned how to connect with myself first, and then connect with other people. I don't think we can be empathic, have empathic connection with other people until we've done the work on ourselves first. That's what I think. We can only know what we have experienced if it's going to be authentic. Otherwise it's just listening, sympathy. Oh dear, that's terrible. You know, useless, really.
Do you think believe that addiction is a symptom of man's separation from God?
Yeah, it is. I think so, ultimately.
Could it also be a wee back as well?
Addiction? Yeah, I mean, that's the irony, isn't it?
It's the only way home. You know, that week's a gift.
Yeah, I think ego collapse is the only way home.
But
And addiction is brilliant for that.
Yeah, it points
Because
to
it
that,
just
yeah.
goes and goes and goes and beats you down until you can't get up anymore. And you give up and die.
Ego, yeah,
Or you have that die within you, which is what the resurrection story is about, really, isn't it? The resurrection story is about dying to the small self and rise into the...
So the hope is that we can live beyond the ego.
Yes,
There is a place beyond the ego.
there is a place beyond the ego, yeah. Yes, and that is the real I.
Yeah, and the thing I'm really interested in is what practices can we use to facilitate that?
Yeah.
And I think you've mentioned meditation, which I think is great, but I also think the step 10 and in the 12 steps is a form of ego reduction and a way of going beyond the ego. I don't know if you think that.
Well, step 10 keeps me out of shame.
But it's actually, I actually think it's actually reducing the ego. And things like, you know, Byron Katie's work as well, where you constantly put the spoke in that system and kind of short-circuiting it, because that's the only way we're going to
I think, yeah, exactly. I think the only way to keep the ego in check is to keep it right-sized.
But is it possible to get rid of it totally?
No.
Forget it.
I think most mystical traditions would disagree.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, you integrate it.
yeah, I mean, if you're Buddha
Yeah,
or if you're Jesus Christ,
yeah.
but I'm neither. I've had it. I'm
But-
Sam from
You
Bromley.
might as well aim high and sort of.
No, absolutely, and that's very, very.
If it's possible.
I think it is possible. Good luck with that. Let me know
I'm
you
not
get on.
saying I'm going there. I'm not saying I'm going there.
No. That is the goal. Nirvana, isn't it?
So if one of the things that I formed within my own soul or my own person is that I grew up needing to be needless, wantless, the ego, whatever that did to me in my childhood, was to be needless, wantless, and alcohol and drugs and all the other things were perfect for that because it was too painful to need.
Right.
Yeah, in terms of human connectivity.
Right.
Yeah, driven as an artist to find connection and to write and do all the rest of this wonderful thing that lived inside the community. But, so when this lady spoke, I just thought the key to so many people, regardless of your childhood, it's so simple, apart from the steps, which are great, it's just the basic thing of do not isolate. It's to connect. The drive behind us as human beings, it's the pursuit. We need to be loved, as you said. But the basic thing that we can learn very quickly is pick up the phone, connect, go and ask someone at a meeting, thank you, have your number, or I loved your chair, or they go against what is the isolated
Right.
part of the ego.
And that's key. Yeah, I sort of speak of the fellowship in the program. I think of fellow travelers, that you want to connect with people who have awakened to the fact that they've been trapped by something, ego, whatever you want to call it, right? I think if you try to reach out to people who haven't, you're likely to get disconnection rather than connection, right? So it's important, like safe people, safe environments, which the 12-step meetings are certainly sort of the model for that. It's safe because people have acknowledged that they've been caught in something and were out of control and did stuff that was like not intended and all, and gotten past the shame enough so they don't have to isolate. But you're right, you have to keep stepping out of the grip of the shame part and into connection. That's the empathic piece, right? I'd just like to offer another possibility in terms of stepping away from the ego. It strikes me as we're talking, there's a kind of an outside step you can make and an inside step you can make, right? The outside step is reaching out to safe people who are awakened in a certain way, to a sense of God, to a sense of a higher power, to a sense of a spirituality, right? And these are obviously not mutually exclusive. I think they need to go together, actually. I call that waking up. It's sort of more like a little bit more transcendent, right? There's another process that I call waking down, right? And when you're in the grip of your ego, you're in the grip of really automatic bunch of feelings and beliefs and thinking and behavior, et cetera, et cetera. If you can push the pause button and use your own personal awareness, which you do actually do that when you turn to God, you're taking your personal awareness away from the chatter and
we did it earlier today, didn't we?
Yeah.
When we came in.
Yeah, and putting it somewhere else, right? On a relationship with a God or a higher power or a good friend or whatever it may be. You can do that internally. You can take your awareness and bring it down into your body where all of the necessary capacities and guidance system resides, right? So our intuition is down here. Our capacity for insight is down here. Our creativity comes from down here. Our empathy comes from down here. All our emotions come from down here, right? Those are all sources of intelligence and connection, right? Nobody in the way we're taught or raised is taught this is something you can do with your own personal awareness. You can go and sit and bring your awareness down, keep it in your body. I think of it as kind of a neighborhood of resources, right? And the resources are all kind of in their own houses. If you go and you visit the neighborhood, the neighbors will come out. They'll talk to you. You'll get an intuition, you'll get an insight, you'll get a feeling, you'll get a gut sense, you'll get an idea that you didn't have before. But it takes patience and practice and compassion and also knowing when the ego is coming in, because it doesn't want you to go there. It's dangerous as far as the ego is concerned, because it's too spontaneous, it's too open-ended. You might feel something or think something or whatever that the ego thinks is dangerous or scary. So you have to be able to spot the ego, be compassionate. It's not a failure. That's its job. It's just doing its goddamn job, right? I was telling Reverend Sam earlier, one part of the ego, that's the punishing part, I've broken down into the critic, the terrorist, and the doubter, right?
What was the last one?
The doubter, right?
Oh, the doubter.
So when the ego attacks, it'll attack you with shame, which is the critic. With terror, you know that you're going to screw up, people are going to hate you, whatever it may be, and doubt your own experience, right? My client who got onto this and really got clear he had an ego and it wasn't him, he'd be sitting in session and we'd be getting into something and he could feel his critic, terrorist, doubter, his ego beginning to arise, and he would say, it's coming up the elevator, it's in the waiting room. Stay the fuck in the waiting room. Don't come in here. I don't want to hear from you. And that can work. You know, a little bit of aggression against those attacks can actually back it up a bit. But anyway, the amount of resources that we have within us for our own wisdom, our own deep intelligence, our own sense of figuring out what's safe, what's not safe, what gives me joy, what gives me pleasure. Discovery, self-discovery, you know, a keeping, expanding of who we are. If you don't do that waking down, I don't think you're going to wake up fully, right? You can have really powerful transcendent breakthrough experiences, but if you don't do the integrating part, I think they ultimately collapse and aren't as strong. So in the second half of my book, it's all about a kind of, I call it a deep self-inquiry process. And it's kind of spelled out in there. We could do a little bit of that in a moment. We don't have a whole, maybe we should keep the questions open, yeah. Right.
Yeah, we got 7 minutes. We've got 7 minutes.
Yes, following on what you're saying, in a very practical way, one of the things that we take for granted and that I absolutely love is the breath. We take for granted that, you know, when we are in the ego, there you check, we are not breathing.
Yes.
When we were hurt, when things happen and we began to think, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I have to blah, blah, blah to be loved, then we are not breathing. And so, I mean, I'm a breath worker, so I'm really passionate about the breath, right? But it's like through taking one breath at a time, you come back in the present, we come back in the present. And then through coming back in the present, what's possible? There is just the space of, is there connection? And then of course, when you do several of these breaths, for me, it's access to peace and empty mind. So I just wanted to say that because it's a very practical.
Yeah.
We forget to take a breath.
There are lots of
Take
ways.
it away.
Lots of ways of reconnecting inside. Journaling,
So I
breath
wanted to
work.
say-
et
absolutely,
cetera.
exactly.
Yeah, right.
And the breath,
What do you think if you've been one has been diagnosed with a mental health issue, and maybe there's addiction there, you know, a mental health diagnosis, and then, you know, trying to have conscious contact with God, and trying to work out what your ego is saying, or what is your ego, or is that your belief, not your belief, is it your addiction, or is it your mental health? I don't even know my question. I guess I'm just...
Well, where is the ego involved?
How would you bring it down, even if it's... Yeah, how would you bring it down to what that is and how to focus on it? Because I know, you know, it's like people have said, like reaching out, phone call and everything. Most people know that's sort of hard. Sometimes it feels like, you know, if you're suicidal, people can say, you know, there's a safe place, you know,
Right,
you know, and it's like by the time you've picked up the phone, you're not going to, if you can pick up the phone, you're all right, sort of thing. If you're so bad that
Right.
you can't even do that,
Yes,
you can't even move,
yes,
you can't
right.
even speak.
It's got you.
It's
Yeah,
got you,
yeah.
you know, and sometimes the only thing I think, like you say, in your head, bring yourself down is
Right.
maybe a conscious contact. But even if that, it's almost the ego probably saying, you know what, you'd be better off not living
Well,
because you're hurting other people.
right, yeah.
It's a bit of a,
Well,
I wonder
if-
if there's something to hold on to in those moments,
Yeah.
or which one of those things.
Well, if you're really captured by some inner state, let's say a manic episode or a
Yeah.
deep depressive episode, the ego is there and it's working, but the first order of business would be to address that disruption, right? Like it is with addiction, right? If you're caught in addiction, I could talk to somebody about their ego, and it's just
Yeah.
you're not available. You know,
Yeah.
you're really captured by something that's ruling you in the moment and possessing you in the moment. And you know where you end up turning the corner. You know, it can be people don't turn the corner; they do die, right?
Yeah.
So that's another scary possibility, right? But if you turn the corner, it's like, you know, the first time you come into a meeting or something, you're not available to much of the useful information that's there. You just know you got to be there to save your ass, right? And this people seem to have done it here, so that's where you start. I often, this is a little different, but when clients come and they're really in the grip, and not in a real like depression or that kind of thing, but they're really suffering profoundly. It's like I say to them, you know, when you start this waking down and waking up process, it's like you're on Normandy Beach and the Nazis have you pinned down, right? But the Nazis are not you. You got to find out the Nazis are not you. And once you start to see the enemy, that the enemy is not you, even though it looks like it's your thinking and all your beliefs and that sort of thing, you got a toehold, right? And you can start to move forward. And if grace happens in a moment like that, thank God, right?
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
a lot of times that doesn't
Yeah.
happen, right? So, yeah, right.
And it's finding sometimes that tiny nanosecond of grace or hope.
Yes.
Or however, you know, that just to hold on to that
Yeah,
bit and
right.
try to.
It's that close a call.
Yeah. It is. Yeah.
Often it's that
Yeah.
close a call.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's time for one more question.
Well, I was going to comment on what you were saying. For me, the ego is really our sense of separated self. It's our identity. It's everything you guys have been talking about. And for me, I live in a space of transcendence, fortunately, mostly. But that isn't really living a human life. We need our egos. I don't think they're just bad, and I don't think they're about just pushing them away. They're who we are. They're how I get to be saying this right now in this body.
See, I would call that your native self.
You would call that,
Your native self.
it is my, maybe, but I think I need that ego to be able to speak.
Okay.
That's my sense.
Yeah, okay.
The native self, well, maybe it's just language.
Well, I hope it's not just language, right? Because we're
well,
talking about important stuff, but I get your
For
perspective.
me, the native self, who I really am,
Is not a
there's
human.
no words.
Okay.
There's
Well,
no
that's
words.
probably a really good way to end it. My goodness, there is no word. Can I just say thank you so much to Dr. Lou Cox and the Reverend Sam Parker, Dr. Lou and the Rev. I found that a really fascinating and inspirational conversation, and I feel privileged to have been here to witness it. Now, we are not meant to sell or advertise at iCAAD, but since I'm one of the founders, I can break the rules. Here we go. Dr. Lou Cox has got a book, surprisingly enough, called Ego, the Ghost in Your Machinery. So there we go. So more words for it. And Dr. Lou will be right outside on the iCAAD book stand for a chat and a chinwag and a handshake and signed copies of the book. So if you'd like to participate in that, just roll on outside. And just one more time, I really enjoyed that, and I got a lot out of it, and I'm going to do a lot of self-examination and waking down in the next few days. So thank you for joining us, and thank you very much to Dr. Lou and Sam. Thank you.